Welcome back to Neural Splendor. I want to finish talking about fault code 559, low fuel pressure, in regards to the ISX15, CM2250, and really 2350 platform. The engine that I used for the demonstration was a 2250. There's just subtle differences between them. We talked about the tappets. I showed you the picture of the tappet that came apart. That can cause major damage in your engine. If your engine number is 798046664 or newer, then you've already got the new style tappets. You don't need to worry about it. If you have an ISX12, your engine number should be 750-37969. If you've got that number or newer, you don't have to worry about it. You've got the new style tappets. With Cummins, the engine numbers are always 8 digits, and as the numbers get higher or bigger, it'd be a newer engine. The filter that I talked to you about in the banjo screw that takes the 186 pounds of fuel pressure from the fuel filter on the engine to the pump, that banjo screw has an 86 micron filter in it. There are different part numbers if you have a ISX12 or 11.9 versus an ISX15. Also, if you take that loose and the gasket is torn up on the banjo fitting, replace it. There was some problems with the gaskets basically coming apart to the place where small slivers of it got into that hole and made their way through the filter. If you start having injector faults that are 1139, 1141, 1142 through 1144, those are timing faults for the injectors. The ECM is having trouble timing the injector. If your engines had that fitting taken out and they had to replace those seals because they were coming apart, it's possible some foreign debris got into that filter and it's smaller than 86 microns and it gets through it and it causes blockages in that pump head, the high pressure pump head. And then the pump has trouble making stable fuel pressure. You may not have 559s if that happens. So if you do have one of the injector timing codes, and the fault codes basically mean the ECM cannot successfully, consistently time the injector. That's kind of the description of it. Then if you have more than one failure like that, you need to suspect that problem. Unfortunately, the only way to solve it is to put another pump head on because you can't clean out the debris that's in the pump head and there's no way to prove that it's in there. But they have taken apart pump heads and injectors off of engines that had that issue, and they've confirmed that that was the problem. Personally, I never ran into that, but they've got a service topic out on it, so actually a technical service bulletin. So it must be a fairly substantial problem for them to do that. The next thing I want to talk about is the fuel lines that go from the fuel filter to the gear pump, and then from the gear pump to the fuel filter, and then from the fuel filter down to the injection pump head, where that 86 micron filter is in the fitting. If you've got rubber hoses on there, or they're actually hard formed hoses, but they're like plastic or real hard rubber, there might be a recall on that. They had some of those, if that 86 micron filter blocked up, say somebody did a service for you and got some garbage in the fuel filter and it's made its way into that fitting and it blocked that hole up, they've had some of those lines burst. Again, they have about 185 psi in them all day long. So that can cause a safety problem if that hose bursts. A lot of fuel's going on the ground by the time the engine comes to a stop. So there wasn't a campaign and they took those hoses off and they put on steel lines that have braided steel flex joints in them. So again, take your engine number. You can find it on the tag on the valve cover. It's either going to be a white tag or a black steel tag. The white tags are like paper stick-on. They got laser writing on them. The black tags are steel, and they basically paint the numbers on. They look like laser, but they're painted on. Your engine number on the tag will be ESNNO. That'll be on the tag, and that's your engine number. If you have an ISX, it's going to start with a 7. The brand new ISX is the 2022 engines, 2021 engines. They'll start with an 8.0. I haven't even seen one yet, but there is information out about them. So if your engine number starts with a 7 and it's an ISX 15, call Cummins, give them that 8-digit number, or call your dealer, give them the 8-digit number, and ask them to go on to Quick Serve Online. That is the website that Cummins uses to support the engines through their dealer and distributors. Go online and see if there's any campaigns, TRPs, or alerts, and they'll know. And if there are, tell them that you want to know what they are. They can print those out and they can email them to you, or they can fax them to you. And if it was open, that means that it needs to be done. If it says closed, that means that it has been done. So if they tell you, yeah, there's a closed one for this or that, you don't need to worry about it. The last thing I wanted to say about the fuel pressure is don't neglect those nuts that hold the connectors in. I showed you that connector in the video that goes in the injector, especially on the B series engines, the mid-range. Had a lot of engines that would run. All of a sudden, one day they won't start. Go out and just take the fuel lines off and loosen and retorque those nuts. Didn't take the connector out, nothing. Just retorque those nuts, put the fuel lines back on, and it started up. And the problem went away. So those nuts have to stay torqued. Haven't seen really any problems on the ISX. They got pretty stout connectors and pretty stout nuts in the head. But on the mid-range engines, that's something to think about and keep in the back of your head. One last thing I want to say is I've been doing this for a long time, so when we talk about the flows, you kind of get a feel for the flows. So if I see that the injector flows down at the bottom third of the max, and I see that there's no fuel coming out of that high pressure rail relief valve, and I see that the pump head is a little over 3/4 of the way to the max or close to the max, we'll change the pump head. Now on the pump head, they did come out with that second test where you put that long, heavy tool on the common rail block, all the other ports, and it does a flow versus cranking speed test. That is an excellent way to verify the pump head's bad. But if all the flows look about the same and everything's right in the middle and you're still logging those faults, then you might have something weird going on like that. You might have something in your tank picking up against the state tube. You might have a flap in the line. I'll end with this story that happened, and this is classic of trying to find the goblin in the barn. It was a truck that came in, and this is when I worked at Cummins. It came in, and it had a slew of 559 faults. This particular truck had the hard plastic fuel lines that went from the tank all the way up to the filter on the frame. And frankly, I think those are good fuel lines because they don't have any rubber in them to get a flap. They don't degrade, and they're nice and solid. So this particular unit had one fuel tank, and the hose came off, and it did kind of a sloppy 90 turn with a bunch of air lines, and it was inside of a kind of like a big piece of rubber wrapped and tied. And that's how the truck came new. And this fellow would be driving down the road, and after he drove 2 hours or more, the engine would just stall. He'd coast over the side, and they'd find the fuel filter on the engine was empty. So they'd fill it up, get it started, and it would run a little ways and stall. And this was a fleet truck, so they'd send a wrecker out with another tractor, and they'd tow the tractor into where I worked. And we would go through the whole fuel system. In fact, when I was a tech, I actually worked on that truck. I spent 4 hours on it trying to figure out what the heck was going on, and I couldn't. And I drained the tank, I looked in the tank, I did everything. And I said, man, I don't know if the ECM's got a problem, it's getting hot and shutting down the computer on the engine. I didn't know. So they took the truck back, and it went out on a run, and every run it went on, after it drove 2 to 4 hours and the fuel tank got down about halfway, this problem would happen. And so the guy that worked over at this place, when the truck got towed back in, he goes, I've had enough of this. And he cut all the insulation and that big rubber flap I told you about off the fuel line. And the fuel line was kinked completely in half where it made that sloppy 90 bend. And he left it there, and he went home, and the next morning when he came in, and it cooled off, and the line was hot because by the time the tank's halfway empty, the fuel in that tank is hot. And the line got soft enough that it would collapse. And then when it cooled off, because of the nature of the way it was made, it would open right back up. And he put a new line on there and ran it a different way, and the problem never happened again. So I just told you that little story because always in the back of your head, expect the unexpected, okay? 90% of the time, you'll check what it is. With the diagnostics I told you, you'll find the problem. If you do that and you can't, then expect the unexpected. Okay, that's it. We're done with 559. If anybody has any questions about it, leave comments below. I'll do another quick video and answer questions if somebody has questions on that. One last thing I'll say is there is another fault code that they added, and it starts with 22, I believe. I don't remember the last 2 digits. But that, if you look that fault code up, it'll say the fuel filter's plugged, change it. And the reason they came out with that fault was when the fuel filters start to plug up, the first thing that happens is you start having spikes in your pressure. The rail commanded and measured will stay the same. All of a sudden, measured will start dropping, but it'll come back up, it'll drop, it'll come back up, drop, come back up. And so the ECM, when it gets far enough down, about 150 pounds, 175 pounds below commanded, and it's doing it consistently, it'll log that fault first. And it did that because a lot of units were getting towed in, people were spending a lot of money, and all it was a fuel filter. When you actually start logging the 559s, it's worse than that, and it can be plugged fuel filters, but if you change them and it's not, then you got to get into the diagnostics. Okay, thanks for joining me on Neural Splendor, and I'll see you next time.